my late wife, Eleanor, and I built our lake house at Serenity Point with two things, cedarwood and promises. A promise to grow old there. A promise it would be our sanctuary. 3 years after I buried her, my own son broke every single one of those promises by handing the keys and her memory over to strangers. He thought I would just walk away. He had forgotten who I was before I became a grieving husband. If you believe some lines should never be crossed, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this is a story about enforcing boundaries. The 2-hour drive north from Burlington is a transition I've come to depend on. It's more than just miles on an odometer, it's a shedding of skins. For 5 days a week, I'm Kirk Bennett, Senior Logistics Manager, a man who wrangles supply chains and speaks in acronyms. My world is one of shipping containers, Excel spreadsheets, and the incessant hum of servers. It's a good life, a successful one. But it's a life lived in grayscale since Eleanor passed. The drive is my slow return to color. The further the city shrinks in my rearview mirror, the more the tension in my shoulders seems to dissolve into the rolling green hills of Vermont. The roads narrow. The houses grow farther apart, and the air itself changes. It loses the city's metallic tang and takes on the scent of damp earth and pine. This was my ritual, a pilgrimage I'd made nearly every weekend for 3 years. Each landmark was a memory. That old covered bridge was where Eleanor and I had pulled over during a rainstorm on our very first trip up here, sharing a thermos of coffee and dreaming. That diner with the flickering neon sign was where we'd celebrated after our offer on the land was accepted, eating greasy burgers and sketching designs for the house on a napkin. The final stretch is a gravel road, and the familiar, rhythmic crunch of the tires under my truck has become a sound of homecoming. I rolled down the window, letting the cool, crisp air wash over me. It carried the scent of the lake, clean and wild. Eleanor used to say it smelled of promises. After a particularly brutal week of dealing with a dockworkers' strike in Baltimore, a week of sleepless nights and endless conference calls, I needed those promises more than ever. I pictured myself on the porch, in the old cedar armchair we'd found at an antique store and lovingly restored. I could almost feel the worn wood under my hands, taste the smoky bite of the bourbon I'd pour, and see the sun bleeding orange and purple across the still water. In those moments, with the loons calling across the lake, she didn't feel quite so far away. But as I made the final turn onto our private lane, a knot of ice formed in my stomach. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. 2 cars, not my truck, were parked in the clearing beside the house. One was Liam's sleek black BMW, a graduation gift I was still making payments on, looking arrogant and out of place against the rustic backdrop of the log cabin. The other was a silver Lexus, pristine and sterile, that I'd never seen before. And then I heard a low thrum of music, some vapid pop song with a synthesized beat that felt like a physical intrusion, scarring the sacred silence of this place. For a foolish second, my heart leaped with a hopeful thought. Maybe Liam is surprising me. Maybe he brought friends for a weekend barbecue. The thought died as quickly as it was born. He hadn't willingly spent a weekend here with me since he was 16. I parked my truck behind the Lexus, the crunch of my tires sounding unnaturally loud. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was immediately punctured by a peal of laughter from the porch. It was a woman's sharp, brittle laugh, and it grated on my nerves. I got out of the truck, the familiar scent of pine now feeling tainted. My boots sank slightly into the soft earth as I walked the well-worn path to the house. A path Eleanor had lined with wildflowers. They were in full bloom, I felt a pang in my chest. Sharp and sudden. The scene that met me on the porch stopped my breath. It was a tableau from a nightmare I didn't know I had. My son, Liam, was sprawled in my chair, the cedar armchair, swirling a glass of deep red wine with an air of bored ownership. His wife, Chloe, was nestled on the love seat, her expensive-looking sundress a splash of bright, unwelcome color. And with them, as if they had been carved into the scenery, were her parents, Richard and Brenda. Richard, a man who always looked like he was smelling something unpleasant. Gave me a lacy, dismissive glance. Brenda, whose smile never quite reached her cold eyes, offered a slight, tight-lipped nod. A half-empty bottle of wine, a brand I didn't recognize, sat sweating on the small oak table I had built with my own 2 hands. Richard was the first to speak, his voice as smooth and thin as old oil. "Ah, Kirk, we were just admiring your generosity." He gestured vaguely with his wineglass, encompassing the house, the lake, my entire life. I kept my expression locked down. A concrete mask I'd perfected over 30 years of corporate life. My heart was hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. "Liam, what's all this?" Liam didn't get up. He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his wine, his eyes holding mine over the rim of the glass. He was 25. But in that moment, he looked like a petulant teenager, daring me to challenge him. The boy I'd taught to skip stones across this water was gone, replaced by this cold-eyed stranger. "Dad, things have changed," he said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. He set the glass down with a soft click. "You're not welcome here anymore. This house is theirs now." The words hung in the air, seeming to warp the familiar scenery around me. The trees, the lake, the very boards beneath my feet felt alien. The buzzing in my ears grew louder, drowning out the chirping of a nearby chickadee. I looked at Liam's face, searching for a sign, a flicker of doubt or regret, and found nothing. I looked at Chloe. She was suddenly fascinated by a loose thread on her dress. I looked at her parents. Richard had a small, smug smile playing on his lips. Brenda was watching me, her head tilted, with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly interesting television show. "I don't understand," I managed to say. My own voice sounded hollow, thin. "What do you mean?" "It's theirs. Who gave you the right?" Chloe finally looked up, arranging her features into a mask of cloying sympathy. "Kirk, let's be reasonable. You're hardly ever here. Maybe 1 or 2 nights a week. It's a 4-bedroom house. It just seems like such a terrible waste for it to sit empty most of the time." A waste. The word felt like acid on my tongue. My wife died in this house. This was our sanctuary. Brenda leaned forward, placing her manicured hand on Chloe's arm as if to comfort her from my outburst. "And we respect that. Truly we do," she said, her tone condescendingly gentle. "But life is for the living, isn't it? We'll take wonderful care of it. You'll see. Richard is already talking about getting a pontoon boat for the grandkids." Grandkids. A future I wasn't a part of. In a place built from my past, the casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. I turned my attention back to the only person who mattered in this insane scenario. "Liam, this house is in my name. It was always meant to be yours. Someday, but not like this. You don't have the right." My gaze drifted past him for a second, to the small oak table, and then I saw it. It was the detail that shattered my composure. It was the final, unforgivable act of desecration. One of the coasters? I'd made a set of 4 from a fallen cedar tree on the property, spending an entire winter carving and sanding them until they were as smooth as silk. I remembered the scent of the wood shavings, the satisfaction of rubbing in the final coat of oil. Each one had a different carving: a pine cone, a maple leaf, a trou, and a heron. The heron was Eleanor's favorite. She said it reminded her of the quiet dignity of the lake at dawn. That coaster, the heron, was now being used as an ashtray. A fat, half-smoked cigar was resting on its surface, a disgusting smear of gray ash fouling the intricate carving of the bird's wing. A white-hot rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, shot through me. It was so pure, so absolute. It was almost silent. It wasn't a scream, it was the cold vacuum of space. They hadn't just occupied my home. They were actively erasing her, one casual insult at a time. I brought my eyes back to my son. He saw me looking at the coaster. He saw the shift in my expression. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. "It's just a thing," the gesture said. My voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet. "Tell your guests to leave, Liam. Now, we will discuss this later." Liam sighed, a theatrical, put-upon sound that set my teeth on edge. He stood up, not out of respect, but to tower over me. "There's nothing to discuss," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's done. Just go." "Dad, you're making things awkward." Awkward. The word hit me like a physical blow. All the years of me biting my tongue, of paying for his mistakes, of funding a lifestyle he hadn't earned, all to avoid this very word, to avoid confrontation, to keep the peace. I saw now that my peace had been his power, and he was using it to evict me from my own life. There was no more to say. To argue, to plead, to shout it, would all be a performance for their benefit. It would be giving them exactly what they wanted, a show of my powerlessness. So I did the only thing I had left to do. I turned my back on them. I walked down the 3 steps of the porch, each one a descent into a new and terrible reality. I felt their 4 pairs of eyes on my back. A physical weight. The crunch of my boots on the gravel path was the only sound in the world. I got into my truck and just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned bone white. The world outside the windshield seemed to warp and shimmer. I stared at the familiar bark of the birch tree by the driveway, trying to anchor myself. I could still hear their music. I felt hollowed out, a ghost haunting the edges of my own memories. Finally, I put the key in the ignition, the engine roaring to life with a satisfying violence that cut through the pop music. As I was about to slam the truck into reverse, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration felt electric, jarring. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with Liam's name. A text message. My thumb hovered over the notification, a cold dread washing over me. I knew, somehow, that this would be the final twist of the knife. I opened it. The message was 5 stark words on a white background. A clean, brutal finality. The house is theirs permanently now. Don't come back. I read it once, then a second time, then a third. The screen's light reflected in my eyes. But I wasn't seeing the letters anymore. I was seeing Eleanor's laugh as we hung the porch swing. I was seeing my own hands, bleeding from a slipped saw. As I framed the walls, I was seeing Liam, a little boy on my shoulders, pointing at a deer by the water's edge. Memories, once a comfort, were now being weaponized against me. And then, something inside me shifted. The crushing weight of grief, the suffocating shock, it all receded. It was still there. Adense, heavy ball in my chest. But it was no longer in control. What replaced it was a profound, chilling clarity. The shaking in my hands stopped. My breathing evened out. The world snapped back into sharp focus. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the phone. The face staring back was not that of a grieving husband or a betrayed father. It was the face of the man I used to be. The man who built a life from nothing. The man who understood that some things are worth fighting for, and some lines, once crossed, must be defended with absolute resolve. I didn't drive home. The thought of my city apartment, a place that already felt like a mausoleum haunted by the ghost of Eleanor's laughter, was unbearable. Instead, I drove south, away from the lake, away from Burlington, with no destination in mind. I ended up pulling into the parking lot of a generic roadside motel an hour later. The kind with a buzzing neon sign that had a few letters burnt out. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial-strength bleach. A scent of transient loneliness. It was perfect. Anonymity was a balm. Sleep was a country I couldn't find the border to. I lay on the stiff, starched sheets, staring at the textured ceiling as the headlights of passing trucks painted fleeting, ghostly stripes across the walls. The rage from earlier had cooled, solidifying into something heavier and more useful analysis. My mind, trained for 30 years to see patterns in chaos, to trace a problem back to its origin point, turned its full, unforgiving focus inward. I replayed the last 3 years in my head, not as a grieving husband, but as a risk assessor. Every concession I had made to Liam since Eleanor's death was a data point, the down payment on his apartment because Chloe felt their starter place was cramped, the checks I wrote to cover the escalating costs of their wedding because her parents insisted on a venue they couldn't afford, the BMW. I had told myself each time that I was keeping the family together, that I was easing his path, that it was what Eleanor would have wanted. That was the lie. Eleanor would have wanted him to be a man. I had been paying protection money to my own son's entitlement, hoping to shield my own fragile peace. I saw it with sickening clarity. I hadn't been preventing a disaster. I had been funding its construction. The scene on the porch wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was a predictable outcome. It was the invoice for my own weakness finally coming due. Sometime before dawn, the analysis was complete. The grief was still there. A hard knot in my chest. But it was no longer a fog. It was a whetstone. I knew what had to be done. Not just to reclaim the house, but to correct the fundamental imbalance I had allowed to fester. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional confrontation. It would be a controlled demolition. At precisely 9 a.m., the next morning, sitting on the edge of the stiff motel bed, I made the first call. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a familiar, calm voice answered. Arthur Vance. Arthur, I said, my own voice steady, devoid of the turmoil inside me. It's Kirk Bennett. Kirk, it's good to hear from you. Though I suspect this isn't a social call. Everything all right? Not exactly. I said, I need your help. I need to protect Eleanor's legacy. and I need to do it in a way that can never be undone. Arthur's office was an oasis of quiet dignity in the heart of Burlington. It was filled with mahogany bookshelves, the scent of old paper and leather, and the weight of settled law. Arthur had been our lawyer for 20 years and a friend for longer. He had stood with me at Eleanor's funeral, his hand, a firm, grounding presence on my shoulder. He knew what that lake house meant. I laid out the events of the previous day, clinically, factually, like I was describing a hostile corporate takeover. I showed him the text message from Liam. Arthur listened without interruption, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, his expression growing progressively harder. When I finished, he was silent for a full minute. The sheer audacity. He finally said, his voice a low growl, "In all my years dealing with probate and family disputes, Kirk, this is breathtakingly brazen." He leaned forward. "We can hit them with a restraining order and an eviction notice by lunchtime. We can sue for emotional distress. We can make this very loud and very painful for them." I shook my head. No. A lawsuit is a fight. A fight implies they have ground to stand on. They don't. A restraining order is a piece of paper they would see as a challenge. This isn't about winning a fight, Arthur. This is about ending the war before they even knew it was declared. I don't want the house back from them. I want to create a reality where they never had a shred of a claim to it in the first place. Arthur leaned back, intrigued. "All right. Talk to me." Eleanor loved that house, I began. But she also felt a little guilty about it. She always said we were blessed. And she wanted to find a way for the house to be a blessing to others. We talked for nearly an hour, exploring her passions. She had volunteered at the VA hospital. Her father had been a Marine. The idea began to take shape, not as a legal strategy, but as a final gift to my wife. The Eleanor Foundation. Arthur said, the name sounding right, the instant he spoke it. We establish a charitable trust in her name. You donate the property to the foundation. Effective immediately. The foundation's mission will be to provide restorative retreats for veterans and their families. It's an ironclad, tax-deductible, philanthropic act. They can't fight a charity for disabled veterans without looking like monsters. I mused. The beauty of the plan starting to dawn on me. Precisely, Arthur said, a predatory glint in his eye. And to protect your own rights, we write a lifetime tenancy clause into the deed of gift. You, Kirk Bennett, retain exclusive, lifetime, unrestricted use of the property. You are the sole arbiter of who is and is not welcome there. The foundation gets the asset. The veterans get a sanctuary. And you get a fortress. Legally. It would be easier for them to sue the Pope. He allowed himself a thin, satisfied smile. It's poetic. You're not taking it away from them. You're giving it away to heroes. Leaving Arthur's office, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The first pillar of my plan was in place. Now for the second, back in my truck. I pulled out my phone and made another call. This one was to a younger man, the son of an old college friend, a boy I'd once helped with a science fair project involving a potato clock. He was now a robotics engineer at a high-tech startup. Ben Carter. His voice was energetic. Quick. Ben. It's Kirk Bennett. Mr. Bennett, hey, it's been ages. How are you? I'm well. Ben. Thanks. Listen. I have a peculiar project I was hoping to get your professional opinion on. It's a freelance job. Off the books. Oh yeah, I'm listening. I have a property, I said carefully. And I need a non-traditional security installation. The goal isn't to keep people out. It's to make the occupants want to leave. Urgently. And it needs to be untraceable. Automated. And remotely operated. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low chuckle. Mr. Bennett, Ben said, his voice filled with a newfound respect and curiosity. You have my complete and undivided attention. We met the next afternoon at a noisy coffee shop downtown. The setting was perfect. Our quiet conversation swallowed by the hiss of the espresso machine and the chatter of students. Ben Carter was exactly as I remembered him. Just older wire-rimmed glasses, a restless energy, and eyes that lit up when faced with a complex problem. As I laid out the general scenario without naming names, just framing it as dealing with unwanted squatters, he began sketching on a napkin. "This is beautiful," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "It's a psychological warfare op, a user experience design problem, where the desired experience is sheer panic." He drew a rough floor plan of the house as I described it. "Okay, so we don't want anything permanent. Nothing that causes actual damage. We want ghosts. Tech ghosts." His pen flew across the napkin. "We can use directional speakers hidden in the HVAC vents to project whispers that seem to come from nowhere. We can replace the light switches with smart switches, controlled by a hidden hub. I can program them to flicker, strobe, or just be on command. Motion sensors in the hallways can trigger, well, anything." He grinned. "What about water? I can install smart valves on the sink and shower supply lines. Imagine all the faucets in the house turning on full blast at once." The plan grew more elaborate, more deliciously cruel. With each passing minute, we devised a system controlled by a simple, encrypted interface on my phone. Running through a series of anonymous proxy servers, Ben was a maestro, composing a symphony of chaos. He was in his element. "The best part," he said, tapping the napkin with his pen, "is that it will all look like a catastrophic electrical and plumbing failure. Plausible deniability is key." He looked up at me. "So, when can I get in?" A few days later, I got the call I was waiting for. It was Chloe. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice level and calm. "Kirk, it's Chloe." Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Hello, Chloe." "Hi, I was just calling because, well, Liam and I and Mom and Dad are trying to get the utilities switched over into our name. And the company is asking for some account details. I was wondering if you could just forward me the last bill." She was fishing, testing the waters, trying to see if I would fight. "I'm a bit busy at the moment." "Chloe," I said, my tone mild. "Non-committal. I'll have to look into it when I have a chance." "Oh, okay," she said, the sweetness in her voice curdling slightly with impatience. "It's just that it would be a lot easier if we could get it done this week." "I'm sure it would be," I said. "I'll see what I can do." I offered nothing more. The silence on her end stretched for a few seconds. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, confused by my lack of anger, my lack of resistance. "Okay. Well, talk to you later." "Then," she said, and hung up. I smiled. The trap was being set, and they were walking right into it, completely unaware. The following Tuesday, a day I knew the house would be empty, Ben went to work. He described the operation to me later. He parked his nondescript van a quarter-mile down the road and approached the house from the woods. carrying his tools in a hiker's backpack. He disabled the single, outdated security camera above the front door in less than 10 seconds. For the next 5 hours, he moved through the house like a ghost himself, his movements efficient and precise. He placed tiny, powerful speakers in the ceiling vents. He swapped out light switches. He installed the smart valves behind the access panels for the plumbing. The centerpiece was a custom-built, battery-powered microprojector, no bigger than a deck of cards, which he mounted in the attic, aimed at a specific point on the upstairs hallway wall. He was just packing up his tools when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. Panic flared. He hadn't expected anyone. Peeking through the blinds, he saw the silver Lexus. It was Richard. Ben grabbed his backpack and scrambled into the master bedroom closet, pulling the door shut just as he heard a key in the lock. He spent the next 10 minutes in the dark, heart pounding. Listening to Richard move through the house, he heard him open the fridge. He heard him walk down the hall, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards Ben had just been kneeling on. Richard muttered to himself, something about his favorite 9-iron. And then Ben heard him rummaging in the back porch closet before the front door opened and closed again. The sound of the Lexus starting up and driving away was, Ben said, the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. That evening, as I sat in my silent apartment, staring at a picture of Eleanor on the mantelpiece, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Ben. System armed and ready. They won't know what hit them. Just give the word. I looked at Eleanor's smiling face. She would have hated the ugliness of this situation, but she would have understood the necessity of protecting a promise. My thumb moved across the screen. I thought of their smug, self-satisfied faces on the porch. I thought of the cigar ash on the heron coaster. My reply was short and cold. Wait for my signal. They're having a housewarming party this Saturday. Saturday arrived, cloaked in a perfect, late summer sky. The kind of day Eleanor had loved most at the lake. The thought brought no pain, only a sharpened sense of purpose. By nightfall, the weather had turned, a cool front blowing in, bringing with it a low ceiling of bruised purple clouds. It was appropriate. A storm was coming. I wasn't at the lake. I was 5 miles away, in a soulless, 24-hour rental office space above a laundromat. The room was aggressively beige and smelled of dust and weak coffee. My companion in this sterile command center was Ben Carter. He was hunched over a laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's glow, looking like a digital age warlock preparing to cast a spell. On the screen was a simple, elegant interface of his own design, a schematic of the lake house, dotted with icons representing his various technological gremlins. Audio is live, he murmured, tapping a key. A small speaker beside the laptop crackled to life. I leaned closer. After a moment of static, the sounds of the housewarming party filled our small room. It was a cacophony of false cheer, the clinking of wine glasses, the shrill peal of Brenda's laughter, and the pompous, booming tones of Richard's voice. And the beauty of it is the equity. Richard was saying, a property like this, Kirk was just letting it rot. A real shame. We'll have a new boat dock in by Memorial Day. A 20-footer. At least. He hasn't even called, Chloe said, her voice laced with a triumphant whine. I think he's finally gotten the message. He knows he lost. Then, I heard my son's voice, and my hands tightened into fists. He'll get over it, Liam said. With the casual indifference of a stranger, he was being selfish, hoarding this whole place to himself. It's better this way. It's a family home now. My family home. I looked at Ben. My face felt like it was carved from stone. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. Phase 1. Ben's fingers danced across the keyboard. He clicked an icon labeled Whisper Track 1. Engaging ambient audio. He said, his voice low with excitement. Volume at 12%. Directional. Focused on the living room seating area. On the speaker, the party chatter continued. But now, if you listened closely, you could hear it. A faint, sibilant sound. Like the tail end of a sentence spoken in another room. It was unintelligible. Designed to slip into the subconscious. To plant a seed of unease. For a minute, nothing happened. Then, Brenda's voice cut through the noise. Shh, quiet. Everyone. Did you hear that? Hear what? Honey, Richard asked, his tone dismissive. Another one of your stories. No. I'm serious. She insisted. It sounded like someone whispering. Liam laughed. Mom, it's an old house. It makes noises. Probably the wind in the eaves. Relax. Have some more wine. She subsided. But the first crack had appeared in their perfect evening. Ben and I exchanged a look. The hook was set. We let them stew in that subtle discomfort for another 20 minutes. Then, we heard Chloe announce she was going to the kitchen to get more cheese. She's isolated. Ben noted, his eyes on the schematic. Perfect. Phase 2. I said. My voice, a low command. Ben's fingers moved again. As Chloe walked into the kitchen, we heard her footsteps. The click of the refrigerator door, he activated the smart switch, controlling the under-cabinet lighting. Through the speaker, we heard a sharp gasp. What the hell, she muttered. What's wrong? Sweetie, Liam called from the other room. The lights just went crazy, she yelled back. They were strobing. Like a nightclub. Probably a loose wire. Liam called back. Unconcerned. This place is old. I'll take a look at it tomorrow. It was creepy, she said. Her voice now a little shaky, as she returned to the living room. Their conversation resumed. But the rhythm was off. It was forced. The carefree atmosphere was gone. Replaced by a brittle tension. They were no longer masters of the house. They were guests in a place that was beginning to feel unwelcoming. They started talking about the strange occurrences. Brenda was convinced it was a draft. Chloe was certain the electrical was faulty. Richard, ever the pragmatist, blamed the wind and old wiring. Liam, in a desperate attempt to regain control, laughed it all off. He was the captain of a sinking ship, telling his passengers the loud, booming noises were just the ship's orchestra tuning up. I looked at Ben. He was watching me, waiting. It was time. I gave him a final, decisive nod. Bring the storm. Ben's face split into a wide grin. My pleasure, he said. He didn't just click a button. His hands flew across the keyboard in a coordinated sequence. Like a concert pianist reaching a crescendo. He was activating the entire system at once. The effect, even through our small speaker, was instantaneous and overwhelming. First came the water. It wasn't a drip or a trickle. It was a sudden, violent roar. The smart valves on every faucet in the house, the kitchen sink, the 2 bathroom sinks. The master shower had opened to maximum pressure. It was the sound of a flash flood happening indoors. What in God's name is that? Richard bellowed over the noise. Then came the lights. All of them. Flickering. Strobing. Dying. And then blazing back to life in a disorienting, sickening rhythm that turned the entire house into a chaotic light show. Liam, do something, Chloe screamed. her voice pitching high with real panic. And then, the final element. The voices. No longer subtle whispers. The directional speakers in the vents now broadcast at full volume, from multiple locations at once, creating a disorienting, terrifying surround sound experience. A cold, clear, synthesized voice spoke a single, simple phrase, repeated over and over, seeming to come from the very walls of the house. Leave. This place. We could hear them scrambling, shouting over the roar of the water and the insistent, raffing, inhuman command. A chair toppled over. A glass shattered. They were in full-blown panic. "It's the hallway," Brenda shrieked. "There's someone in the hallway. That's the projector." Ben said to me, his voice calm. A stark contrast to the chaos we were hearing. Showtime. The micro-projector in the attic had just cast its image onto the far wall of the upstairs hall, a tall, slender, vaguely human silhouette that seemed to glide silently across the wall before vanishing. It was a 2-second illusion, but it was enough. To them, in their terror. It was an apparition. The psychological assault was complete. Now for the final, percussive shock. "Ready for the finale?" Ben asked. "Do it," I said. He hit the last command. A small, pre-planned power surge directed to a single, specially modified bulb in the main living room lamp. We heard a sharp, concussive pop, louder than a gunshot in the enclosed space, followed by the tinkle of falling glass. That was the final straw. The rational part of their brains, already strained to the breaking point, simply snapped. The instinct for self-preservation took over. We heard a chorus of raw, animal screams. "Out, everyone! Get out now!" Richard was roaring. The sound of their frantic, stumbling escape was vivid. They were falling over furniture, shoving each other out of the way. We heard the heavy front door slam open, banging against the exterior wall. We heard their footsteps pounding down the wooden porch steps, the frantic crunch of gravel as they ran to their cars. Doors slammed. Engines roared to life with a desperate whine. Tires squealed as they tore out of the driveway, one after the other. And then, silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the steady, gushing sound of water pouring from every open faucet in my empty house. Ben leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. "And scene," he said softly. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Well, that was effective." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the sound of the water, the sound of the house being cleansed. Less than a minute later, my phone, sitting on the table between us, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with Liam's name. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. My movements slow and deliberate. I put it on speaker. "What did you do?" The voice that erupted from the phone was barely recognizable as my son's. It was a ragged, hysterical shriek, laced with pure terror and fury. "What the hell did you do to the house?" I held the phone away from my ear slightly. I let his frantic, panicked accusations wash over me. He screamed about ghosts, about a catastrophic electrical failure, about sabotage. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. My voice was perfectly calm, perfectly level. It was the voice of a man inquiring about the weather. "I have no idea what you're talking about, son." There was a moment of sputtering, incredulous silence on his end. I continued, letting a note of feigned, distant concern enter my tone. "Maybe the house just doesn't like you." I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call. The silence that fell in our small, beige room was absolute. In the sterile, beige rental office, the silence that followed the phone call was more profound than the chaos that had preceded it. Ben was staring at me, a look of awe on his face. He slowly began shutting down the laptop, closing the windows to our digital haunting one by one. The schematic of the house vanished, replaced by a simple desktop background. The operation was over. "So what now?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Now," I said, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. "We let the law do its work." I didn't hear from Liam for 2 days. I imagined the frantic calls, the accusations, the hiring of electricians and plumbers who would find nothing fundamentally wrong. I pictured them trying to sleep in that house, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. Their stolen prize now a source of terror. My silence was its own form of psychological warfare. I let their imaginations, far more potent than any of my tricks, do the heavy lifting. Then, on Tuesday, Arthur Vance sent the letters. Not emails or phone calls, but formal letters, delivered by courier to Liam and Chloe's apartment and to Richard and Brenda's home. The letters were masterpieces of understated legal menace, containing no accusations or threats. They simply requested the pleasure of their company at the offices of Vance and Associates to discuss the final disposition and formal transfer of the property located at Serenity Point. Their arrival at Arthur's office that Friday was a spectacle of misplaced arrogance. I wasn't there. Of course, my presence was unnecessary. Arthur recounted the scene to me later with a considerable amount of professional satisfaction. Liam and Chloe arrived first, dressed in what Arthur described as power casual. They were trying to project an image of confident new homeowners. Coming to finalize their paperwork, Richard and Brenda arrived moments later, looking smug and triumphant, as if they were arriving at a coronation. They were a united front, a pack of hyenas, so sure of their victory they were already tasting it. Arthur's assistant showed them into the main conference room, the one with the long mahogany table, the leather chairs, and a palpable sense of gravity. They chose seats on the opposite side of the table from Arthur, a clear line drawn in the sand. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his voice calm and professional. He had a single, slim file folder on the table in front of him. "This shouldn't take long. We're here, as my letter stated, to discuss the transfer of the Serenity Point property." Chloe leaned forward, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Excellent. We were hoping to get this all sorted out quickly. There have been some issues with the house, and we need the title fully in our names to authorize proper repairs." Arthur gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Ah, yes. The issues. I was told about them. However, that's a matter for the new owners to address." Liam sat up straighter. "Exactly. So, what do we need to sign?" Arthur looked at them, a long, measured gaze that seemed to take in every detail of their greedy Takamos. Expectant faces. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice dropping slightly, losing its cordial tone and taking on the hard edge of legal finality. "You won't be signing anything. You're not the transferees." The shift in the room was immediate. Chloe's smile froze and then faltered. Liam's brow furrowed in confusion. Richard leaned forward, his mask of affability slipping. "What are you talking about?" Kirk agreed. His own son said. Arthur held up a hand, a simple gesture that commanded silence. What Mr. Bennett's son may have said or what you may have assumed is, legally speaking, irrelevant. Kirk has been my client for over 20 years. His wishes regarding his property are all that matter. And 2 weeks ago, he made those wishes legally and irrevocably clear. He opened the file folder. As of 10 days ago, the full, unencumbered title for the property at Serenity Point, including the house, all structures, and the surrounding acreage, was formally and legally donated by Kirk Bennett. Chloe let out a small, triumphant gasp, a flicker of victory in her eyes. To us, Arthur looked at her, and for the first time, he let a sliver of his contempt show. It was a cold, dismissive glance. "No," he said flatly. "The property now belongs, in its entirety, to a federally registered 501c3 nonprofit organization called the Eleanor Foundation for Veterans Rest." Silence. A thick, profound, suffocating silence descended on the room. Their faces were a study in disbelief. Liam's mouth was literally hanging open. Richard's face was turning a blotchy red. Arthur continued, his voice precise and relentless. "The Foundation's mission is to provide therapeutic, peaceful retreats for disabled and combat-weary veterans and their families. It is an act of philanthropy, one that honors the memory of Kirk's late wife, Eleanor, whose father was a decorated Marine." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Any attempt to challenge this donation would require you to sue a charity for wounded soldiers. I wish you the best of luck with that." Richard finally found his voice, sputtering with rage. "This is insane. It's a trick. We'll sue Kirk. We'll sue you." "On what grounds?" Arthur asked, his voice genuinely curious. "Did you have a contract? Did you pay, Mr. Bennett, a single dollar for the property? Your entire claim was based on a verbal assurance from his son, who had no legal authority to make such an offer. You are, in the eyes of the law, tenants at sufferance, or, to put it in layman's terms, squatters." He then delivered the final, crushing blow. "Furthermore, the deed of gift contains one specific, legally binding covenant. Mr. Kirk Bennett retains a lifetime tenancy, granting him sole and exclusive use of the property for the duration of his natural life. He, and only he, determines who is permitted on the grounds. As of this moment, none of you are. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises and remove your personal belongings. After that, you will be considered trespassers, and the Foundation will have you removed by the Sheriff's Department." That was when the implosion began. The united front shattered into a million angry, accusatory pieces. "You told me," he agreed, Chloe shrieked, turning on Liam. "You said it was handled. I thought it was." Liam shot back, his face pale with shock and humiliation. "He's my father. I didn't think he would do something like this." "You didn't think?" Richard roared, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched backward. "You stupid, arrogant boy. You cost us a multi-million-dollar property because you didn't think." Brenda, her face a mask of fury, pointed a trembling finger at Liam. "This is all your fault. We trusted you. Chloe trusted you." Their greed, no longer having a common target, turned inward. The beautiful, wealthy family was revealed for what it was: a collection of selfish, grasping individuals, held together by nothing more than mutual avarice. Arthur simply sat back and watched their alliance crumble into dust. While that drama was unfolding, I was back at the lake house. I had arrived that morning to a quiet, empty home. The water was still pooled on the bathroom floors, and a single lamp in the living room lay shattered. I spent the morning cleaning. I mopped the floors, aired out the rooms, and swept up the broken glass. It felt less like a chore and more like a purification ritual. Late in the afternoon, I was wiping down the oak table on the porch, and there it was, the cedar coaster. The one carved with the heron, it was still there. A disgusting brown cigar ash ground into the delicate grain of the wood. I picked it up. I didn't feel anger anymore. I took it inside to the kitchen sink and, with a soft cloth and some wood oil, I carefully, gently, cleaned away the stain. I rubbed the oil in until the wood's natural, reddish glow returned, until the carving of the heron was clean and proud again. I placed it back on the porch table, exactly where it belonged. The house was quiet. It felt like it could breathe again. It felt like mine. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. The foundation was formally announced. The first group of veterans was scheduled to arrive in the fall. I heard through the grapevine that Chloe had left Liam, her parents, humiliated, had cut them both off. Liam was living in a small, rented apartment, working a job he hated. One evening, he showed up at my city apartment. Unannounced. He looked diminished. The arrogance was gone. Replaced by a hollowed-out exhaustion, he stood in my doorway, unable to meet my eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He walked into the living room and just stood there, looking lost. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said finally, his voice cracking. "For everything. Chloe, she and her parents. They got in my head. I was stupid. I wanted to make her happy. I messed everything up. I just want to, I don't know. Start over." I looked at my son, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy he used to be. Before the entitlement had taken root, a part of me, the fatherly instinct, wanted to pull him into a hug, to tell him it was all okay. But I knew that would be the worst thing I could do. That would be undoing the most important lesson of all. Family isn't built on what you can take from it. "Liam," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "it's built on respect, on boundaries. You didn't just break a boundary, you tried to erase it. You tried to erase your mother." Tears welled in his eyes. "I know. I'm so sorry. I hear you," I said, "and I hope you are. But starting over isn't something I can give you. It's something you have to build for yourself. Go get a life. Son, a real one that you've earned. Then, maybe, we can talk about what's next." He stood there for a long moment, the tears silently tracing paths down his cheeks. He just nodded, turned around, and walked out of my life. The door clicked shut behind him. Not with an air of finality, but with the quiet promise of a necessary new beginning. The last scene of this story doesn't take place in a lawyer's office or a silent apartment. It takes place on the porch of the lake house. 3 months later. It's autumn now, and the Vermont hills are on fire with color. I'm sitting in my cedar armchair, a cup of hot coffee warming my hands. But I'm not alone. In the chair beside me is a retired Army sergeant, a man named Joe, who lost his leg in Fallujah. We're watching his 9-year-old daughter fish off the end of the dock. Her squeal of delight as she reels in a tiny sunfish echoes across the water. The house behind me is filled with the quiet sounds of other families, other soldiers, finding a pocket of peace they so desperately earned. The house is no longer a silent monument to what I lost. It's a living, breathing testament to what Eleanor and I built. It's a place of healing. And in protecting her legacy, I hadn't just found justice. I had found my own peace. Right here, where it had been waiting all along.